Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Saturday, September 16th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Western Kentucky game is today, the game against Michigan in 70 days. Yes, exactly 10 weeks until the end of the college football regular season for the Buckeyes. The season's here. It does not last that long. Please try to enjoy it, even if Ohio State gives up a first down or something today. It's going to be okay. Please enjoy college football season while it is here. We're going to be doing our best to enjoy this week of college football season. No ranked versus ranked matchups this week, but still some games to keep an eye on during the course of the day. Joined by Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com to look at some of those games. Tony, the first game is Penn State at Illinois. That game kicks off noon on Fox. Penn State a 14.5-point favorite. And this is one that every time I see Penn State and Illinois, I flash back to the 2021 Ohio State-Indiana game. We were sitting in a hotel room in Bloomington going, well, as soon as this game ends, we'll head over to the stadium and go cover the Buckeyes. And then we were sitting in a hotel room for like 45 minutes to an hour longer than we expected to be.
It's funny because a Friday morning I was listening to Sirius XM and Dusty Dvorak and Danny Cannell have a show, and Dusty Dvorak was talking about that game, saying he had to get to a game and his broadcast partners, Dave Pash and Tom Luganbill, were super mad at him because he wouldn't leave. Like that's the kind of game it was. And so, yeah, we just standing around waiting, and 9 overtimes, a whole bunch of 2-point conversions. Would I love to see it again? Of course. Do I expect it? No. It's surprising how, maybe it's not surprising, but Penn State's offense has been pretty darn good right now, leading the Big Ten, I think, and scoring 50 points a game. Illinois struggled, but never gave up against Kansas, which I think is promising. But I still like the offense of Penn State here, along, of course, with their defense. And the Illinois quarterback is up and down in terms of what they're getting out of it. So I don't feel great about 14.5. I would probably just stay away from that. But I like Penn State in this one for sure.
Yeah, it does feel like Illinois has typically tried to do it with running and defense, and they don't really quite have the rushing attack they had last year. And Penn State seems like between the pair of really talented running backs and the Drew Aller experience at quarterback and a little bit of a better offensive line this year, it feels like that team is sort of probably just got a little too much offense for Illinois to keep up with. Next one, K-State at Mizzou, noon on the SEC network. Kansas State favored by 4. Both of these teams are 2-0, but Mizzou is a really uninspiring 2-0. And this is one where, the SEC East, man, the SEC on the whole, but the SEC East in particular, I don't know how many more losses the SEC East can take out of conference before it really, really starts to become a really pervasive narrative around Georgia's schedule this year. And, if Georgia slips up just once in the regular season, they can't lean on but the SEC is so good this year narrative, because I don't know that the SEC on the whole is particularly good this year.
No, and I would agree with that. And you look at what Kansas State has done against Southeast Missouri and Troy, they've done what they should do. They've been effective. They are Kansas State. This is another Kansas State team. So that's what you expect from them. And Missouri, this is a home dog against a ranked opponent. There are a handful of those this week, but this is one where I don't feel like I feel like Kansas State should be able to cover this. So I feel Kansas State's ability to just gum everything up is not good for Missouri, which Missouri I think needs Missouri needs everything to go well for them. And Kansas State is like the program that makes sure nothing goes well.
Yeah, Kansas State is the Utah of the Big 12, where just they're not real flashy, but they just play in a way that's a real pain in the butt, and they're just really solid. And they will be the Utah of the Big 12 for another year this year, and then Utah will probably be the Utah of the Big 12 next year. But for now, that's and when I call anyone the Utah of whatever they are, that is a compliment. That is Utah is a team that I think is. I think Ohio State fans in general probably gained an appreciation for Utah a couple of years ago during that Rose Bowl, and they have not done anything to. They helped Ohio State out a little bit last year in the Pac-12 championship game. Looked pretty good against the Florida Gators during Week 1. So yeah, that is a high compliment. And yes, Kansas State seems to be really kind of just back to doing Kansas State stuff under Chris Kleiman. Next up, well, this one's on here because of who one of these teams plays next week. Central Michigan at Notre Dame, 2:30 on NBC. Notre Dame a 34.5-point favorite. I know they beat North Carolina State last week. I'm really not sold on how good North Carolina State is. I think this is a case where Ohio State and Notre Dame are both going to come into next week's game not really sure exactly how good they are.
Yeah, and I think both teams are they going into this week just trying to get a win and then close up shop? Like, are you really expecting Notre Dame to throw a bunch of stuff out there? I'm not, but you're also playing a Central Michigan team that I think won by 3 points over New Hampshire last week, so not a great team. But this is going to be it's a good thing it's only on the internet, I guess is what I would say for the viewers out there.
I think that one's on NBC. I don't think that one's just Peacock because there's a Peacock game at 5:00. So,
well, I'm just looking. ESPN says Peacock. So.
Oh well then
maybe they don't have NBC.
Yeah, maybe they don't have NBC. Yeah, the 5:00 is when Washington and Michigan State are on Peacock. So I do believe that's an NBC game. But yeah, Central Michigan lost to Michigan State 31-7 and then beat New Hampshire 45-42, which also probably raises some questions about Michigan State's offense because that one was real close at half. So we'll get to Michigan State in a minute. South Carolina at Georgia, 3:30 on CBS. Yes, the CBS is going back south of the Mason-Dixon line this week. Georgia favored by 27.5. South Carolina lost by a couple touchdowns against North Carolina in week 1 in Charlotte. This is one where it feels like Georgia can't afford to do the 2015 Ohio State thing where you just sort of fart around against lousy competition. Because they don't have any real quality games on their schedule outside of maybe Tennessee, and we'll get to Tennessee in a minute, but the regular season schedule this year is just kind of dreadful, and they have not gotten any help from anyone on their schedules early in the season. So, this feels like one where South Carolina always kind of seems to make things a little more interesting against Georgia than you'd think, and Georgia really can't probably afford that this week.
I'm just wondering if, obviously, this is about Spencer Rattler because South Carolina right now, I think, is averaging 53 yards rushing per game. And if you're 128th in the nation in rushing, going to Georgia is probably not the way to remedy that. So is this something where we know we're not going to be able to run, so let's just throw it all over the place. Let's take some shots. Like, you got to come out swinging and never stop. And if that's either going to be a 56-7 loss or perhaps like a 42-35 loss, something like that, where you're trying everything that you can to give yourself the best opportunity to win, because running the ball isn't going to get it done. And I know every head coach is like, well, you got to try to be balanced. You can't just throw it all the time. Well, if you can't run it at all, you're going to have to throw it. And Georgia knows that. So that makes things even worse. So 27.5 is still a lot for a conference game against a team that has some NFL talent. But I think this is still, I'm liking Georgia pretty comfortably here.
Yeah, that'll be one that if South Carolina can keep it interesting for a half, that will be one of the better games on the schedule this week. But we'll see. Next up, it is the Washington Huskies making the return trip to East Lansing after Michigan State went out to Seattle last year. These are two teams headed in very, very different directions. 5:00 on Peacock. Probably best for everyone that this one is sequestered on a streaming service. Washington favored by 16.5, which seems like about a touchdown low to me. So I'm sort of wondering what I don't know. But Washington opened with a 56-19 win over Boise State. Week 2, they beat former Ohio State offensive coordinator Kevin Wilson and the Tulsa Golden Hurricane 43-10. So they are basically the stonks meme. Line go up for Washington State. Meanwhile, in East Lansing, NF Tuck about to go to 0. Tony, talk me out of Michigan State getting absolutely curb stomped in this one.
The only way I can do that is the magic of the substitute interim head coach, the team rallying around that guy and wanting to show out for their head coach who has been suspended, that sort of thing, the emotional aspect of it. But I I can't talk you into this one. I can just say that has happened in the past, or there's, stuff like this has happened where it creates a level of unpredictability, I guess I would say. But when you look at this one, Tom, I'll give you two stats here, and you tell me it's the immovable object versus the whatever the other thing is. It's Michigan State, like fourth or fifth in the nation against the pass, like 107 yards allowed through the air. Now that is legitimate, Tom, and don't even look at their schedule to see who that's come against. And meanwhile, Washington leading the nation with 470 yards passing per game. Who are you going to believe, offense or defense?
Yeah, I think I don't think you've talked me out of the Huskies so far. If you want tickets on the 50-yard line in this one, you're going to be paying about $100. So excitement, not exactly, and that's in the lower bowl. Upper bowl, you can get tickets on the 50 for about $60. So for what is probably the biggest non-Michigan home game for Michigan State this year, that's actually in their stadium, that's probably not indicative of a real high level of excitement for the Spartans. So
how large would that line have to go before you would not take Washington? Like 27, 25, somewhere in there?
Yeah, I mean, like you get to 24 and a half and I start going, okay, 20, I could see them winning by 24. Once you get even just a half point past that, I kind of go, yeah, all right. To be on the other side of 17 at 16 and a half, that just, that feels suspiciously easy to me, which generally that's, that's the like jar of honey. And it's like, oh, what's this? And it's under a box with a stick. I mean, sure, absolutely. So yeah, that's the only thing that would make me even hesitate there is, well, I've fallen into this exact trap many times before, so certainly it can't happen again. Speaking of things that certainly can't happen again, Tennessee going to the swamp in Florida, certainly, Tony, they can't lose again. I think they've won there twice in the last 30 years or so. 7 o'clock on ESPN. Vols favored by only 6. Florida was not great in week 1 at Utah, really got kind of stomped there. Tennessee looked real bad last week against Austin Peay. That was close at halftime. I assume I'm kind of more willing to write off the Tennessee Austin Peay thing as a, FCS opponent the week before, much more, impressive road game or brand name road game anyway. So I guess the Vols here, given the 6. What's your thoughts?
If Florida was any good, they would win this game. So we'll find out if they're any good. You know how Joe Milton can throw the ball 100 yards?
I've heard that, yes.
Very well documented, which means, of course, that he is a great quarterback, and also means that he is dead last in yards per attempt among SEC starting quarterbacks. And so, interestingly, also, he is he is below Florida quarterback Graham Mertz in the pass efficiency leaderboard in the SEC. So things aren't going tremendously well for the Tennessee offense, as they don't. It doesn't matter if you can throw the ball 100 yards if you can't complete a pass 15 yards down the field. And I think I'm trying not to be mean about it on social media, because some of this could blow back on Joe Milton, but all of the people that were just anointing him when you and I kept saying, have you not seen? And I don't think they did, but now they are.
Yeah, that feels like there's a reason that you have not seen a team wheel out a trebuchet at quarterback before, but it's like, well, look how far it can fling this thing. Like it can fling this boulder so far. Where's it going to go? Oh, I mean, somewhere generally in that direction, probably. But yeah, turns out that's not a great way to run an offense, which I'm as surprised as you are. Speaking of me being as surprised as you are, Tony, Michigan's playing a terrible team non-conference on Saturday. I can't believe it either. Bowling Green visiting Ann Arbor, 7:30 on BTN. Sharon Moore, fresh off his one-game self-imposed suspension for NCAA violations, now being honored as Michigan's new interim head coach, because Michigan's head coach is suspended for one game, or for this game, for NCAA self-imposed violations. Wolverines, as much as renegade programs tend to be, favored by a lot here. 40.5 points for the Wolverines. They have looked extremely bored the first 2 weeks, which, yes, same. But, is this team any worse? Is Bowling Green any worse than UNLV, who they beat 35-7 last week? I feel like no.
No, I'm with you, and I don't think Michigan is covered yet in any of their two games, and they're not running the ball very well, and I wonder if they try to establish that and get that going this week, and does that slow things down, or is this the week they finally can run the ball and then they throw it? I'm not jumping on the Michigan score a bunch bandwagon until they start doing it. So yeah, they're going to win. It's going to be boring. It's a great primetime game for the fans there in Ann Arbor to enjoy the raucous nighttime atmosphere of Michigan Stadium against a nearly in-state opponent. But of course, Michigan lost that border war with Ohio because they just didn't have it in them. And here we go.
It's Michigan not having that dog in them for 2 centuries or so, apparently. Yes, I'm aware of what happened in the Ohio State Michigan game the last 2 years. Thanks for asking. Speaking of people who may or may not have that dog in them and perhaps saying regrettable things, let's talk about Colorado State at Colorado, 10 o'clock on ESPN. Buffs favored by 24. Tony, I'm wearing a hat indoors. Your thoughts?
You classless piece of garbage. My favorite thing about this is that this is a rivalry game, and then Deion Sanders is telling his team, now they've made this personal. Like that tells you like maybe the lack of history that he cares about or understands or acknowledges with Colorado State, but it's like they've said something about me. Now this is personal for us. Whereas, it's a rivalry game. It should have been personal from the outset. But I don't think it was a wise move to say stuff like that and just give Colorado and Deion Sanders any more reason to want to run it up on you. Like they're trying, Jay Norvell, Colorado State head coach, trying to present themselves as something different, classier, whatever, they're going to be presented as something quite different after this game, I think.
This does feel like one where, okay, you have a team that just played its historic rival, had a big win on national TV. You've got game day coming to town. Like this feels like a week that they could get distracted and maybe catch it by surprise, and then like you poke the bear for no discernible reason and give them a reason to focus. That seemed like a poor choice. I am super fascinated, Tony, whether the headlines, not this week, but next week when they play Oregon, whether it's going to be Coach Prime getting stomped by Oregon next week, or whether that will just be Colorado after Coach Prime had those 2 big wins the first 2 weeks. The focus has been so much on the head coach there, and I get it. I'm going to be so interested to see whether that's Coach Prime has taken this L playing Oregon or next week, or if it's if that reflects more poorly on the program on the whole and the players.
Will it be if they lose that game, Deion's in the post game? Yeah, they just didn't have it today. It becomes a they versus a we, that sort of thing. I don't expect that, but the narrative around it, that'll be interesting to watch. I am interested to just get home and watch this game, though, Colorado State and Colorado, because I've only gotten to see bits and pieces, so I'm actually looking forward to it and seeing what all the hubbub is about.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. That's going to be such a fascinating team to watch over the course of the season. I continue to think that it's not going to be able to hold up just because of depth issues there, like that just won't hold up over the course of the season. Because shocking development this year. The Pac-12 might actually be good at football in its final season. I think they have 8 teams ranked this year, which is, I believe I heard no other conference other than the SEC has ever done that, which is pretty remarkable for a league that is going to basically explode into a million pieces at the end of the season. So that'll be interesting to see how long they can sustain that. I don't think I'm still not buying 8-4 Colorado or anything like that. I'm now at the point where they probably make a bowl game, but that's about as far as I'm willing to go. But we'll see where they end up Saturday night against the Buffs against the Rams. 10 o'clock will be a nice way to wrap up your college football Saturday. And if you are looking for a good way to start your college football Saturday, we will have a little bit of pregame coverage from Ohio Stadium tomorrow. giving you an update on injuries and all that kind of stuff, a quick look ahead at the Ohio State Western Kentucky game. And then after the game, our full post-game coverage will start right after the clock hits 0. You can find it all on youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Make sure you're subscribed there. Make sure you hit that bell there. We're going to be doing a ton of coverage. I know Western Kentucky is not the biggest game. It is going to be a really interesting game. We've talked about that on yesterday's show. But then also, hey, guess what? Next week, that is going to be a really interesting game. That is going to be a fascinating showdown with Notre Dame. And you're going to want to be get all the coverage you can get out of that. And the only place to do that is at BuckeyeHuddle.com and youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. So find us in both of those places. Subscribe in both of those places so you get excellent coverage of the team, recruiting, X's and O's, and much, much more. That will do it for today. Enjoy the football. We will talk to you tomorrow.